Hi, my name is Lucas Kinder, and this is the Clean Air Act of 1963 and its amendments. So the initial purpose of the Clean Air Acts, after World War II, there was an industrial boom. Post-war soldiers were coming home, and all these factories and industrial processes were switching over from producing things like war vehicles, weapons, munitions. They started converting into factories that would produce things like commercial and personal vehicles, appliances, really commercial, normal things we see produced today. And of course, there were no regulations on what these factories and industrial processes could emit, so the air quality was really, really poor. Cities were full of smog, places had problems with acid rain. People were constantly breathing hazardous chemicals and particulate matter, and there was really a lot of illness and death associated with the poor air quality. A lot of infants and children were dying from this. People struggled to go outside on some days. You couldn't even see, the building across from you, as you can see in some of these pictures. So the Air Pollution Act of 1955 was the first legislation on air pollution. It was actually the first federal act, and it wasn't there was no control or regulation of emissions. It was enacted under the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, and this aided federal research in air pollution, and as well helped to fund state and local government, which state and local government at the time were the only ones that could really control or regulate air pollution or emissions, and they didn't do so very well. They didn't really do much. I mean, they may, shut down a factory or two that's, really pumping out some nasty stuff, but there was really no control or regulation at this time period. So the Clean Air Act of 1963, this was really the first time clean air was used in any legislation wording. This gave federal control over interstate air pollution, and it really focused on things like high sulfur content fuels, coal and oil at the time that was being burnt for energy generation purposes, to run factories, things like that. This act gave federal grants to state and local research and control. Again, they're trying to help out. And it was quite a bit of money at the time, $96 million. Of course, there were still problems, and we'll see later acts to come. The 1970 amendment of the Clean Air Act established the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. This was a large restructure of the 1960s era amendment. This really focused on new and existing pollution sources, which was new to the amendment. This was the first time we saw national ambient air quality standards, really focused on 6 types of pollutants. There were primary and secondary standards. And these standards permitted a maximum concentration of certain air pollutants. The primary standards addressed anything that was necessary to, quote, protect the public health with an adequate margin of safety, end quote. The secondary standards, quote, protect the public welfare from any known or anticipated adverse effects, end quote. The 1970 amendment also required state implementation plans, and this is pretty much states had to state how they were able to comply with the NAAQS. The amendment also came out with new source performance standards and national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants. And this amendment also gave private citizens the right to sue government or private organizations if they fail to comply with provisions in the amendment. The 1977 amendment of the Clean Air Act required that national ambient air quality standards were to be updated every 5 years. This new amendment contains several subparts, one being prevention of significant deterioration, which classified attainment and non-attainment areas, as well as the allowable increase in pollutant concentration for each class. There were 3 classes at this time, and each class was given an allowable amount of pollution emission in increments. And if you wanted to build a new factory or something, you would actually have to prove that the facility's emissions would fall within the allowable increment of pollution for their class. Existing sources were given an exemption period, allowing facilities time to update equipment before being subject to violations of the PSD standards. The 1990 amendment came about, and the feds kind of realized that attainment and non-attainment areas greatly differed around the United States. This amendment added 3 more non-attainment zones under PSD for a total of 6 zones. It gave people more time to comply with standards. It targeted all kinds of emitters, especially smaller ones, emitters of pollution. The National Ambient Air Quality Standard added a whole lot more pollutants, a total of 189. It started using maximum achievable emission control technology, made that a new big thing. It created a permit program under the EPA, which approved state issuing, and it gave the EPA power to fine and give criminal penalties. So for a recap, it took about 40 years of development to see this command and control type of regulation. We saw major air quality improvements throughout the United States. It really changed America's health and saved a lot of lives. Some of us may not be here today if it weren't for these air quality regulations. And it opened the door for a lot more regulations, things like environmental health, pollution regulations of all types. Thanks for watching my presentation.